Good afternoon again, ladies and gentlemen, here in Santa Clara, California. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening if you're following this next general session out there on the World Wide Web via SYS-CON TV, embedded in 2.5 million pages now. Let's embed Chris Kelly into the expo next. The most intriguing title of all the sessions submitted. He doesn't quite tell us what he's going to talk about, except he's going to focus on what matters. So I'll better shut up and let's hear Chris Kelly, New Relic. Take it away, sir.
Hi, everybody. I know it's, 3 o'clock? So I'm at that mid after lunch kind of session. I expect some heads to start bobbing a little bit. Don't worry, it's okay. You can come here and take a nap. I don't mind too much. And you probably walked in and saw this vitamin water bottle on the screen, and you're like, what in the world did we get ourselves into? So as the vague things happen to, let's get those out of the way. So, this is about focus, and that's really what's important to me, is focus and what we're kind of paying attention to, and we'll get into a lot of these things. But what we want to do is take away some clutter first, right? So our lives are cluttered with everything in the world. So from family to work and whatnot. And we're all building applications. We're building applications for the internet. We're building applications for internal uses. We're doing embedded systems. We do all kinds of crazy stuff. And there's all kinds of components that go along with that. In order to do good application development, good product development, you need something like source control, right? So what if we could get rid of source control as something we had to worry about? These are just things that clutter up our minds instead of letting us focus on what's really important, right? So testing. Hopefully everybody here tests their stuff. Whether you're doing unit testing, you're doing integration testing, you're doing load testing, some kind of testing, hopefully you're doing it. That clutters up our heads, right? So let's get a little more focused. Release cycles. How many people have these long, arduous release cycles in which basically, you go through a QA system, you have bug reports, and it goes back through a cycle, you have these deadlines you have to hit. That just clutters up our brain. We can't focus on what's important if we're worrying about these release cycle systems. Infrastructure. We have to put these applications somewhere, right? We need to know where they're going to go. Is it going to scale? Security, things like that. Infrastructure's a pain in the ass. Sorry, don't mean to swear too much. So that clutters up our brain, right? What about availability? What happens if EC2 East goes down again? Hopefully nobody was exclusively in East and had troubles during that time. We just had Sandy last week that luckily I think most of the internet survived a good chunk of that, but these things are real, so we have to worry about availability. Monitoring. I work for New Relic. I'm a big fan of monitoring. But setting up monitoring, keeping monitoring going, instrumenting 100,000 lines of code, all of those things are a giant pain in the butt. Just cluttering up your brain and kind of getting in the way of really focusing on what's really important. And finally, there's performance. Our applications actually work is a really huge, important thing. Refactoring, again, the scaling issues, making sure our applications are doing what our users are expecting them to doing, that clutters up our brains. So, we're at a conference called Cloud Expo, and I don't know, I guess the world has so many options now that we can kind of get rid of so much of this stuff, and sort of what I'm going to talk about today is really about what I call cloudifying your life. That means taking away all of the things that reduce your focus and let you really get down to what's really, really important. Take away those things like source control and infrastructure and whatnot, right? So I try to cloudify my personal life. So that way I can focus on what's important to me. So anybody use Uber? I like to use Uber. I live in San Francisco. So if I don't have to worry about getting from point A to point B, these are the things that I mean by cloudifying your life. Outsourcing these chunks of monotony that we don't want to deal with anymore and focus on what's really important. So let's focus on what matters. A couple logistics. My name is Chris Kelly. I identify myself as a happiness engineer. I guess formally my title, if I handed you a business card, it would say developer/evangelist, but I'm not too keen on that. I prefer happiness engineer. I'm a former CTO. I ran an e-commerce company that was very successful and was sold to our largest client. So I'm quite familiar with the world of engineering and culture and all the shenanigans that go along with this. I recently joined New Relic this year, and I've had a great time so far. I rant quite a lot. I get on stages and talk about things like this. So I like to think of it as vision. Some people think of it as like a soapbox, but I'll let you pick. And if you want to find me somewhere on the internet, chances are it's at Amateur Human, GitHub, Speaker Deck. That's where you'll find these slides later. Twitter, obviously. And then welcome to email me. You're welcome to email me your rants, and we can have rants together. So I work for a fun company called New Relic. And how many people here know New Relic? Oh, not that many. How many people use New Relic? Probably less, ideally, right? Okay, so let me give you a little background on what New Relic does. New Relic is application performance monitoring. So we make a piece of software that allows you to analyze what your application is doing in production. So we're tracing every single request that the user does and showing you timing data about that, how long the methods are taking, your database queries, your network times, things like that. It's entirely SaaS-based. So that means you put in a library into your application, and all of the metrics come to us. You don't have to put up anything else. So you can kind of see where my biases are coming from, and I think that's important to know. We've been doing it for 4 years, and right now we're collecting about 60 billion metrics a day on behalf of 500,000 applications, about 25,000 customers. So we have some experience in this. And I was a New Relic user long before I was a New Relic employee, and we can get into that sometime later. I'm going to stand on this platform for a second and steal some time. So November is a month that tries to bring awareness to men's health issues. I thought it was relatively appropriate that, it's just now November. We're at CloudConf. I have the opportunity to kind of promote this. So New Relic is actually doing a promotion with Movember. They're a big customer of ours. We're very happy with them that we'll be donating $10 for every new user that signs up during November. If you want to participate in other ways, you can create teams for your own companies. If you don't have a mustache, the idea is that you grow a mustache this month. So I haven't shaved my beard in 10 years, so it would take a lot of money in order for me to shave it off and then grow one back for this month. But this is something that's really important to us. I think it should be really important to you. And if you want, we can also donate that $10 to women's health issues as well. So that's the end of that, but I appreciate it if you guys just take that into consideration. So back to the scheduled program. So utilize the cloud to focus on what matters. So let's kind of figure out what those two sides of that sentence mean, right? So we've got utilize the cloud. What is the cloud, as they say, right? Like everybody's so excited about this cloud thing. If you look at Google Trends, cloud computing has kind of seen its peak in late 2011. That's the largest search volume. So if you're not familiar with Google Trends, the way they do it is there's 0% of searches and then 100% of all the searches. So in 2011, cloud computing got its most searches ever in its history. So the cloud to me means a lot of different things. I don't think the cloud started in 2008 as Google search might indicate, but we started to kind of identify these things. AWS came on about 2006, and we really started to think about our infrastructures differently. We started to think about our applications differently. But there's a long history to cloud. There's SaaS. Salesforce did a great job of introducing the idea of SaaS to the world. You can see that long before cloud computing became a term that people cared about, SaaS was a term that people cared about. There's PaaS, platform as a service. That's a relatively newer term. Surprisingly not as new as I expected it to be, but that's basically taking your infrastructure and sending it out into the world. And these are very scientific charts, by the way, obviously, with the exact numbers. But these are actually real charts. I actually did the research on this. But so PaaS is a relatively one. Infrastructure as a service is a very new one. And that's basically instead of kind of abstracting away your servers, now we're talking about making infrastructure as a service. You guys are probably familiar with that. I don't want to bore you too much. But let's take a look at some other things related around computing that have to do with these topics. So Amazon S3 came out in March 2006 was when they launched, right? That's sort of the very first big offering of cloud-based sort of services, right? So that's got a nice long history there. If you're not using S3, I recommend it. I just found out during this research that you can use BitTorrent as a protocol for it, and I thought that was pretty rad. Amazon EC2 is a very classic example, right? That's an August 2006 start. Amazon actually moved the entire infrastructure of the retail site over to EC2 in November of 2010. So they've been running Amazon.com off of EC2 for over almost 2 years. Well, 2 years, I guess. All right. That spike where you see Amazon sort of reaching its peak is the outage in April of 2011. So, you know, but if you notice that Amazon.com didn't go down, even though they had been on EC2 for 8 months, 6 months, right? So it is possible to use Amazon services without taking down your own site. Some other terms that I thought were interesting: lean startup. Hopefully some of you are experienced with lean startup. How many people have heard of lean startup? Not as many as I expect. Lean startup actually came out of the 1980s Japanese automotive industry, lean in general as a concept, on making things more efficient, getting them just in time, things like that. So there's a whole, I can talk all day on lean manufacturing. I used to work in the publishing industry, and that's a big thing there. So find me later, we'll nerd out on lean. But the term itself, lean startup, was coined by Eric Ries on his blog in 2008. And he was talking about a way of doing application development and kind of getting to a minimum viable product and this whole cycle, and we'll talk about that in a bit. And then the book itself, Lean Startup, was published in September of 2011, so that's where you're going to see that big meteoric rise. A corollary that I saw that was pretty interesting, actually, was DevOps. You're probably familiar with DevOps as well. If you look back and forth, that DevOps is maybe a few months behind the lean startup movement, and if you think about what DevOps is, there's a lot of things that are lean to that. And I didn't realize the corollary was that strong. So DevOps is not a job, right? Nobody is a DevOps. If they are, then hopefully you will get a way to change their title to system administrator, site engineer, something other than the term DevOps. DevOps is a way of working, right? It's a culture. It's a perspective on the world. It's about collaboration and coordination. It's about focusing on something other than being internal. It's about empowering companies to do things faster and better. And I actually think there's a lot of corollaries between that, lean startup, stuff we'll talk about today. So yeah, if you want to find a decent DevOps talk, there's one on Speaker Deck that I gave. I think I did a good job. That's just self-promotion. So, utilizing the cloud to focus on what matters. Well, kind of an idea what the cloud is, right? Like, it's this vague thing that we all talk about as the cloud, and we're just going to put our stuff out there and see what happens. We won't get into that too much. What we want to get into is, like, what matters. How do you know what matters? And I think that's where the vagary of this title comes from, right? Like, what are you focusing on that what matters? And I've been doing some research and investigation as I was preparing for this talk, and you know, I think I've come up with the most scientific illustration to date of identifying what matters. Okay? No? Oh, all right. Well, so stuff that matters is probably stuff we need to do, right? Like, that's not contentious. We should be doing the stuff that matters. Stuff our users want. That one gets a little more contentious. You know, why should you be doing what your user wants? How do they know what they want? How do you know you don't know better? And so there's a whole set of these things that we should be doing, that we need to be doing, that our users want. And that's the stuff that matters. There's a group of things, there's a set of things that our users want to do and stuff that we should be doing. And that's what we want to focus on. Because in the end, it's about our users, right? And There's a bunch of other stuff though, right? There's stuff we'll never get to. All these things that our users want. Sometimes they're bad ideas. Sometimes they're just good ideas that are out of our scope. We can't really deal with it. And sometimes there's things that our users think they want, but they don't really understand their own problem. Then there's the other half of the thing. There's stuff that we need to do, we just don't get around to doing. Better testing. I'm assuming nobody here would raise their hand to say they are comfortable with the level of testing that their applications go through. If you work in multiple data centers, have you ever turned off one of your other data centers? You know, Netflix tries it with the Chaos Monkey. I'm not that brave. I used to run in different data centers. I never turned one of them off. But chances are I'm never going to get around to doing that because there's so many other things to be doing. So that chunk that's eaten out, you know, the Pac-Man mouth side, right? That's the stuff that matters because really we should be working on the things that matter all the time. If you're not, you're probably working on the wrong thing. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that we're never going to do, but we end up doing anyway. You know, and this is really a conversation about performance, or resources. It's a matter of we have limited resources of manpower because that's our most limited resource. And so what are we going to work on? We're going to work on that stuff in the blue side that we should be doing, but we just don't have time for. We're going to work on the stuff that our users want, some arbitrary feature that we're like, why do you want this? But okay, I'll do it because you're paying my bills. Or should we be working on that middle stuff, the stuff that matters? Well, when we're working on stuff, there are a couple different sets, right? There's things you're good at and things you spend your time on. And if you're not familiar with set theory, that means A is a proper set of B, meaning everything in A is in B. So you're never going to be good at something you don't spend any time on. And the only things you spend your time on are the things you're going to be good at, right? I was really good at Angry Birds for a while, really good. Like that might have been the best thing I was good at. We spend our time being parents. We get better at that as we get older, right? We also get better at building infrastructures, monitoring, reporting, alerting. I'm a better developer. I'm a better manager, all those things. So we spend our time, we get better at them. If you want to see it in a little bit of a different way, again, one of my more scientific charts, all the things that you're good at, you spend your time on. But that's not the most important fact. There's the thing you're going to be best at, and there's going to be the thing that you spend your most time on. And those things are equal. So, what are you going to be spending most of your time on, right? Like if I spend most of my time filing TPS reports, I'm going to get really good at filing TPS reports. Again, I was really great at Angry Birds for a long time. Not as good anymore. You know, this is an idea that came out of 37 Signals. They're a development shop. They make Basecamp and a number of other sort of SaaS-based solutions out of Chicago. Awesome group. And it's a really important one to think about. If you're spending most of your time building infrastructure, that's what you're going to get really great at. But is infrastructure the thing that your users want, need? Does it make their time better? Does it make their experience better? Things like that. So that's what we want to focus on, right? And obviously, being a happiness engineer, I want to spend all my time making people happy. So I'm biased. I have a very strong opinion about this. But I think I'm right. So, and you're sitting here, so you get to listen to me. So, what do you want to be good at, right? You're going to be great at the things that you're best at. So back to our scientific chart. I build stuff for people. I build stuff for external users, right? I build them for customers. I've worked with customer stuff. I've worked for internal stuff. I've built stuff for myself. I'm assuming you all do the same. Some of you probably work in consumer internet stuff, e-commerce where you're selling things to the world. Some of you probably work in content where you're displaying ads on a page. Some of you build internal applications for internal users, the guy that sits next to you. But we all work for people. None of us build stuff for machines. Not until Skynet comes around are we going to start building stuff for machines. It's a Terminator reference for those of you that are sleeping. Thanks. And what's really interesting about users is that they will try to solve their own problems. Anybody that's looked at Excel, somebody using Excel in what might be the most awful way you've ever seen, is a user with a problem that they're trying to solve themselves. They have this tool, they have this say Excel thing, right? And they need to make some flyer or some spreadsheet, but it's not really calculating anything. It's more of like a report system. I'm gonna make an Excel sheet, save it, send it off to somebody, they're gonna open it up. That's literally a problem looking for a solution. But that's inventive, right? Users are very resourceful. I think the hope for humanity is found in the things that people use Excel and email to resolve. The problem is, users don't know what they want most of the time. They think they know. That's not supposed to say that. We don't know what users want. Users don't know what users want, right? Like, we're just identifying things. Users stab in the dark, we stab in the dark. Nobody knows what anything. We're just making products and hoping for the best, right? I call this the G.I. Joe conundrum, where knowing is half the battle, but I don't know what the other half is, and therefore I don't know what the first half is, and then now I'm stuck. I don't know anything. So what we're going to do is we're going to solve this with data. And this is where lean startup comes into play. These are ideas about lean. We want to build stuff, we want to measure it, we want to learn, and we want to build. Now, that has another name. It's agile. We want to have an agile organization, agile infrastructures, agile software development. All these things are the same. But agile isn't my favorite word. It comes with a lot of baggage. I'm not a big agile fan. I don't practice Scrum. I don't practice time boxing. I do practice TDD. I do love Kanban. I think it's awesome. So we're not talking about big A agile. We're talking about little a agile. We're talking about sort of things without all this context around it. We want to talk about a process, a culture, a way of doing business, a way of working. So agile comes from two other words, which I'm not going to try to pronounce, meaning nimble and quick and move and drive, right? So this is the agile we're talking about. And this is the agile I think big A agile meant to be. And then it got overloaded with TPS reports and ended up being big A agile. Not that any of those things are bad. I just am not a fan of being very rigid on all of those things all at once. Pick the stuff that works for you and use it. Like I said, I use Kanban, TDD, things like that. I'm not trying to pick a fight on agile. So I want to be nimble and I want to be quick. I want to be able to move. I want to be able to change. I have another word that comes to mind when it comes to this kind of thing. I want it frictionless. It doesn't come with baggage. I want to, the things that slow us down, our movement, our cars go slow because the tires have friction. That's why we stop. We're not nimble because I can't turn because of friction. Friction's kind of a weird thing. So what we want to do is a frictionless environment. That's what's really most important. And that's everywhere. I want my frictionless environment to be in development. I want a frictionless release cycle. I want frictionless operations. I want frictionless metrics. I want an engineer to be able to come to work on his first day, boot up the application, and start developing, and release a feature that day. Etsy is actually really big about this. If you guys are familiar with Etsy, they have a very, some of the best thinkers when it comes to things like DevOps on their team. If you're an Etsy engineer, you show up on day one and you put something in front of real users on day one. But you can't do that if you have all these frictions. If you're waiting for, let's say, provision of a couple new servers, right? Like, oh, we have this new server, we want to provision it. Okay, well, that's going to be 6 weeks. Well, 6 weeks is a lot of time to be working on something without getting feedback from your user. What if you're working on the wrong thing? I've worked on plenty of wrong things. If you're not doing metrics where you're tracking how many times your features are being used, you're blind. You have no idea what you're working on is right. Metrics isn't about load. It's not about page response time. Metrics are about understanding what your application is doing, what your users are doing. And I think that's really important. So we want frictionless all of these things, right? Frictionless the world. So here's the things we talked about in the beginning that kind of clutter our brain. And there's one of them that's sort of more important to the others. I bet you can't guess which one it is. You know, source control is relatively solved, right? We have GitHub. If you don't like GitHub for whatever reason, you can get GitHub installed on a local basis, right? But again, you're not really worrying about that. You can get a version of GitHub that's installed behind the scenes on your servers because you have a security operations team that are a little too strict. And like, we can't put our source code up there. Okay. What else is bothering us? So automated testing. We're testing, but in order to be frictionless, in order for me as an engineer to code something, right? I'm going to start with coding, and then I want to make sure that my code doesn't break everybody else's code. I need to test it. But I can't put it through this long 2-week QA cycle. That's not going to, how do I get feedback on what my code's doing if I have to wait for QA to get back to me? Context switching is really hard for engineers. It's not something that engineers are great at. You know, engineering is a creative feat, and when you have to stop your creative actions and turn and do something else for a while and then come back to it, it's not likely going to be good. We need to get in this zone. Probably heard that phrase before. So if I can't get my tests back and understand what the application is doing immediately, then I'm going to have to do context switching. I'm going to have to be like, okay, well, here's some code I wrote. It does something. I'm going to send it out to QA. I'm going to start working on this other code, which I still, again, I have no idea if it's good for the user or not. QA comes back to me a week or two later and says, hey, by the way, your code breaks. Does this weird thing. I'm like, oh, crap. I don't remember writing that code. Now I've got to do all this massive context switching. There's infrastructure. And these, by the way, these are not endorsements strictly of any one of these companies. These are just example companies. There are lots of companies doing awesome stuff that aren't included in this list of 6. But I want to give you some ideas. So infrastructure, Heroku. Heroku is now owned by Salesforce.com. They started as a PaaS, right? Now you can run all kinds of applications on Heroku. And all I have to do is say, you know, Heroku deploy, or I'd have to git push to Heroku. My code goes to Heroku, it's now live in production. That's it. As an engineer, my code can go up that quickly. I can have commit hooks so that I can push my code to our source code repository. It checks it on Travis, pushes it out to Heroku automatically, as long as the build is green. You know, there used to be an old adage that Rails doesn't scale. Well, I can now type on a command line, Heroku PS for process web 8. Now I've got 8 worker processes running my website instead of 4. Rails scales instantly, right? But think about the world that would have existed long before that, where I'd had to get, you know, servers provisioned, then bootstrapped, and then the security team would have to set some stuff up, then that would sit on somebody's desk for a while, eventually it'd get to me. I probably don't have SSH keys because I don't have root access, so I can't really do anything anyway. So now I've got to get my release manager to then deploy it out to those, and so on and so forth. You guys are familiar with this. Availability. EC2 does go down. Shocker. And Heroku goes down, by the way, on EC2 because Heroku is very dedicated, very tied to EC2, just as a word of warning. RightScale does, you know, works with lots of different infrastructure providers and has all kinds of tools around that, around making sure your site is available when one is down versus another. We also have monitoring that's cluttering up our brain, remember? Splunk, pretty rad company. Pingdom, pretty rad company. Monitoring is important. In fact, as a DevOps nerd myself, if you're not monitoring it, it's not live. It's not in production yet. It's not done. You know, monitoring is to operations what unit tests are to a developer. We can't know what it's doing unless we're monitoring it. So it's really important. There's another rad monitoring company called Relic. Check them out. We focus on performance rather than things like log processing, which is like what Splunk does, Pingdom, which talks about mostly availability. So we've got all these things in our head. We've got lots of companies that do these things. And so why aren't we using them? Why would I build a team to solve these problems for me when I can solve them myself? Sometimes it's security related. I used to work in e-commerce, so I worked with PCI. I understand those anomalies, but that world is getting better. New Relic has bank customers. We have HIPAA compliant customers. We are SOC 2 compliant, so like we can deal with government stuff. These aren't really concerns anymore. The world is different. And I think these are just old habits we're living in. So this is what an application, these are the 6 things you need for an application, right? So we build an application, but we don't just build one application. This is a cloud conference. You build services, right? So your application is actually like 5 different applications. But your application is more than that. You've also got a dev environment, a QA environment, a staging environment. Now you've got some features that you need, some fulfillment you need to do, like log aggregation. So you've got all these things, that stuff that's cluttering up your head. You want to do some data mining on it. That's cluttering up your brain. You want to do visualizations. You want to do any number of things, right? Like there are tons of features we could be building and tons of internal tools, external tools. All these things are starting, these are things that we need to worry about. These rabbits go out of control. My clicker would work. Clicker. And we've actually built entire teams just to deal with this stuff. And lo and behold, my clicker doesn't work. Oh, I just ruined it. Lo and behold, we've got a user that just wants to be heard. There are features that they want to do, that they want. But we've filled our lives with all of this other stuff. We've got source code problems because instead of using GitHub, we decided to roll our own, or we're not using provisioning like with Chef or Puppet because bash scripts were just great enough. We're not using infrastructure where we can actually spin up new instances as our applications get massive traffic from, say, a sporting event or hitting Hacker News, whatever size of company you're working on. All of that stuff has to be worked on, and then we end up with, poor little user stuck. So instead of working on all those things, why aren't you being better at dealing with users? Why are you the best infrastructure organization, even though infrastructure isn't your business? Right? Like there are companies that make this their business. Travis makes a continuous integration system. They are great at running continuous integration. Don't you want the best? Because they spend all their time thinking about that. New Relic spends all of its time thinking about collecting data. Why don't you let a company like New Relic be awesome at collecting data and let you work on what you're awesome at? I don't know what you guys do, but if you're awesome at selling stuff online, then go sell stuff online. Building an infrastructure team that focuses on this humdrum stuff that's already a solved problem doesn't make you a better e-commerce company. It just doesn't. I've been that person that's tried to make a better e-commerce company through those problems. So, you have a couple things to do. First, utilize these tools. These things are at our disposal. Why aren't you using them? And then if you're not focusing on what matters, why don't you start? And I guess last, probably you should contribute to Movember, because that's really important. And in the end, cloudify your life. This is the Japanese kanji for wabi-sabi, which is a aesthetic value that things aren't ever finished. Things are always moving forward. It summarizes as nothing lasts. This is all ephemeral, and so we want to focus on that imperfection and work on it. So we have a few more minutes left. I'm happy to talk about this because I'm passionate about it. I want to give credit where credit is due. The first photo is that's like credit photo, and then I have to give credit to that little rabbit icon because I didn't make it. So Thank you guys for spending your time with me. I really appreciate it. I'm C. Kelly at New Relic if you want to talk more about it, or Amber Schumann anywhere on the internet. Thank you.
Let's not let him off the hook without asking him a question, though. First question for Chris. Come on, let's make him sing for his supper. What did you say it was? Wabi sabi. Say it again.
Wabi sabi.
Wabi sabi. Wabi sabi. I've learned something. Ladies and gentlemen, come on.
For anyone that speaks Japanese.
Is this the late afternoon look? Surely not.
Say, who was sleeping in there? Who? Come on, raise your hands.
So there wasn't a single thing that they didn't understand, Chris. That makes you possibly the best presenter this century, in which case we will simply give a huge and thunderous second round of applause for Chris Kelly and thank him and thank you all. And in the theme of what matters, we have semantic coming up on a reasonably quick change.